Temple has died. She was one of the most popular and famous child stars ever, singing, acting, and dancing her way to stardom.
"12 years after her passing, the world is still captivated by Shirley Temple, the golden child of Hollywood, whose dimples and curls could melt the Great Depression itself. But behind that radiant smile was a reality no one was allowed to see. The pressure, loneliness, and control left marks that never healed. In secret, she turned to a quiet habit to cope, but it would later take her life. For years, the truth about how she really died was kept hidden. But now her children have finally confirmed the rumors. The rise of a star. She grew up in front of the world before she even had the chance to understand it. The curls, the dimples, the songs, everything about Shirley Temple looked picture perfect. But what no one knew back then was that the little girl behind the smile was living a life that would leave lasting scars. She became a global phenomenon, yet the strange world she was pushed into as a child never really left her. Now, more than a decade after her death, her children have begun to confirm what so many suspected. Shirley Temple was born on April 23, 1928 in Santa Monica, California, the youngest of 3 children in a modest middle-class family. Even before she could string sentences together, Shirley could already mimic adults with a confidence that startled everyone around her. Her mother, Gertrude, noticed it immediately, and from that moment, she became determined to make her daughter a star. She believed Shirley had the charm to captivate people, and she made sure the world would see it. When Shirley was just 3.5, Gertrude enrolled her at Meglin's Dance School, a small studio in Los Angeles known for training children for Hollywood. From that moment, every ribbon, every costume, and every hairstyle was carefully chosen to make Shirley stand out. Her curls became iconic, exactly 56 perfect ringlets that Gertrude styled by hand, one by one, every single day. The look was part of the magic that audiences would later fall in love with. And for Shirley, it also became a symbol of the perfect child star in the making. Not long after joining the dance school, talent scouts from a small studio called Educational Pictures spotted her. They were producing a series of short films called Baby Burlesques, and Shirley was exactly what they were looking for: cute, funny, expressive, and already well-trained. The Baby Burlesques were supposed to be comedy spoofs of popular adult movies, except they were acted out entirely by toddlers. The children wore adult costumes from the waist up and diapers from the waist down. The concept might sound absurd today, but back then it was seen as entertainment. This was Shirley's first real job in Hollywood, but it wasn't as easy as it looked. Shirley was reportedly paid just $10 a day and was expected to perform with precision and charm, even when the scenes made little sense to her. Reports from the time describe how the children were disciplined harshly if they forgot lines or misbehaved. According to some rumors, which Shirley herself never confirmed, the punishment could be as extreme as being locked in a sound box cooled with ice until they calmed down. True or not, those stories captured the fact that Shirley Temple's childhood was built on strict control and pressure that no child should have to endure. By the age of 6, she had already become one of the most recognizable faces in America. And when she signed with 20th Century Fox, her life changed completely. The studio knew exactly how to market her as bright, cheerful, and filled with hope. Her films were designed to make people smile at a time when the country was struggling through the Great Depression. She was Hollywood's answer to despair, a symbol of innocence and optimism in a world that desperately needed both. People didn't just watch her movies, they clung to them. Between 1935 and 1938, Shirley Temple wasn't just famous, she was unstoppable. She became Hollywood's #1 box office draw for 4 years straight. Presidents praised her, world leaders requested meetings, and toys, dolls, and merchandise bearing her image sold faster than anyone could produce them. She was earning millions for the studio, and yet, she was still just a child trying to make sense of it all. The adults around her, including her agents, producers, directors, and even her own parents, were guiding every part of her life. But in doing so, they were also taking away the one thing she didn't even realize she was missing: her childhood. As the cameras rolled and audiences cheered, The little girl behind the smile began to fade into the character everyone wanted her to be. She learned to perform happiness even when she was tired, to sparkle even when she didn't feel like it, and to hold herself together when all she wanted was to play and rest. Those lessons learned far too early would follow her for the rest of her life, because behind the applause and the fame were secrets, sacrifices, and struggles that no one dared to talk about back then. The hidden struggles. Fame made her a household name, but it also built a cage she couldn't easily escape from. Behind the charm and the songs, Shirley Temple's life was run by schedules, contracts, and the unrelenting expectations of adults who saw her more as a business than a little girl. And what she endured behind the scenes was exhausting, isolating, and far more complicated than anyone imagined. As her fame exploded, so did the demands placed on her. She was often on set for hours straight, switching in and out of costumes, performing take after take under the glare of studio lights. Every gesture, every smile, every line had to be perfect. The crew treated her like a professional, not a child, and there were no exceptions for fatigue or frustration. If she cried, the cameras waited. If she stumbled, she was corrected. She had to keep performing because everyone, from the cast to the crew, the studio, and even her own family, depended on her. Her day was planned down to the minute. There were wardrobe fittings, dance rehearsals, recording sessions, and endless publicity appearances. She was paraded in front of reporters and fans who adored her without realizing how tightly controlled her life had become. There were moments she wanted to run off set and play outside, but that kind of freedom simply didn't exist for someone like Shirley Temple. The studio didn't just own her image, it owned her time, her schedule, and almost every part of her identity. By the time she entered her teenage years, she had already spent more time working than most adults. But Hollywood is rarely kind to child stars who grow up. The public that adored her as the nation's sweetheart began to lose interest once she was no longer a wide-eyed little girl. The roles became fewer, and the studio's enthusiasm faded. When she was just 12 years old, 20th Century Fox quietly dropped her, claiming her films were no longer drawing the same crowds. It was a brutal shift, from being the most famous child in the world to suddenly feeling disposable. For a girl who had been defined by applause, that silence was confusing and painful. She wasn't old enough to understand the politics of fame, but she felt the loss deeply. Everything she'd built her sense of worth on had disappeared almost overnight. Hollywood had moved on, and she was left to figure out who she was without the cameras. But her struggles didn't end when she left the studio lot. Away from the spotlight, she had to confront the reality that much of her childhood wealth was gone. Years of hard work, countless hours of filming, and global fame should have left her with a fortune. Instead, when she reached adulthood and gained control over her finances, she discovered that her father, who had managed her accounts, had mishandled most of it. Out of the millions she had earned, only a small fraction, a mere $44,000, remained. It was one of the most painful realizations of her life. The people she trusted most had failed to protect her. Yet even then, Shirley didn't lash out or wallow in anger. She simply moved forward as she always had, but the disappointment lingered. There were also darker moments she only spoke about much later in life. In her memoir, she described an incident that happened when she was 12, a moment that revealed just how unsafe Hollywood could be for young girls. During a meeting with a studio executive, she said he behaved inappropriately, leaving her shocked and confused. This heartbreaking memory stayed with her, becoming one of the many experiences that showed how vulnerable she truly was behind her image of innocence. As her fame grew, so did the threats. The kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh's baby had terrified the entire nation, and Shirley's parents began receiving disturbing letters from strangers. Some threatened to harm or abduct her, and others demanded money. Studio security was tightened, and she was often surrounded by guards, even when she performed. The cheerful little girl who danced across the screen lived in constant fear that someone might actually try to take her. It was a strange contradiction, adored by millions, yet never fully safe. All these pressures shaped her adolescence in ways she could never fully undo. Even when she tried to return to a normal life, people refused to see her as anything but the curly-haired child star. Teachers treated her differently. Classmates either idolized or resented her, and the press followed her every move. The same image that had made her famous now became a burden she couldn't escape from. She was expected to stay perfect, polite, and cheerful, even as she struggled to find her footing in a world that no longer revolved around her. When she eventually tried to reinvent herself, the public wasn't sure what to make of it. Shirley Temple, the movie star, was supposed to fade away quietly, not grow up and take on serious roles, especially not in public service. But that's exactly what she did. As an adult, she turned toward diplomacy and politics, determined to make a difference in the real world. Yet even then, she wasn't taken seriously at first. Critics dismissed her as a child star playing diplomat, as if the sparkle of her past would forever outshine her competence. But she proved them wrong, working with genuine dedication and intelligence that slowly earned her respect on the global stage. But the challenges didn't end there, because when she eventually fell in love, she was met with one of the most heartbreaking experiences of her life. Love, marriage, and family life. After years of living in front of the camera, Shirley Temple wanted something real. She had spent her entire childhood surrounded by directors, agents, and photographers, and by the time she turned 17, she was longing for normalcy and a life that wasn't dictated by studio schedules or box office numbers. When she met John Agar, a handsome young soldier and aspiring actor, it felt like her chance to finally step into a world that belonged only to her. Their relationship began like something out of a movie. He was charming, protective, and attentive, everything the young Shirley thought she needed. To the public, their 1945 wedding looked like the perfect Hollywood love story. The nation's sweetheart marrying a war hero in a ceremony that made headlines across America. Fans adored it. Magazines printed photos of the newlyweds smiling under showers of confetti, describing it as the fairy tale ending every girl dreamed of. But behind those pictures, the reality of their marriage was far more complicated. John Agar struggled to find his place in a world where his wife's fame overshadowed everything. He was trying to build his own acting career, but no matter what role he took, he was always introduced as Shirley Temple's husband. The attention that once seemed flattering started to weigh on him, and his insecurity turned into resentment. Shirley, still barely out of her teens, found herself caught between her husband's jealousy and her own growing disillusionment with the life they were living. Agar's drinking made things worse. Insiders recalled how his temper would flare, how the pressure of Hollywood and the glare of Shirley's fame seemed to push him further toward self-destruction. She tried to make it work, but the emotional toll became too heavy to ignore. They had one daughter together, Linda Susan, and Shirley was determined to give her the stability she never had as a child. But by 1950, the marriage had completely fallen apart. At just 21, she was already a divorcee, a single mother, and a woman trying to rebuild her life after a very public heartbreak. That could have been the end of her fairy tale, but Shirley Temple was not the type to let disappointment define her. That same year, fate introduced her to someone who would change everything. His name was Charles Alden Black, a decorated Navy officer and successful businessman. He wasn't interested in her fame, and perhaps that's what drew her to him most. For the first time in her life, she met someone who saw her not as a star or an image, but as a woman. Their connection was instant and genuine. Charles was older, steady, and grounded, everything that Shirley's chaotic early life had lacked. When they married in December 1950, it wasn't splashed across tabloids in the same glamorous way as her first wedding, but it was real. He became her anchor, her true love, and the man who brought peace to a life that had been turbulent since childhood. Together, they built the quiet kind of happiness she had always longed for. They settled in Woodside, California, far from the sound stages and flashing cameras that had once ruled her world. There, Shirley embraced motherhood fully. She and Charles had 2 more children, Charles Jr. and Lori, who would go on to become a musician and bassist for the rock band The Melvins. For Shirley, family life wasn't a retreat from fame. It was a conscious choice to create something normal, stable, and lasting. She gardened, hosted neighbors, and lived the kind of peaceful domestic life she'd never experienced growing up. Even though she had stepped away from acting, Shirley didn't fade into obscurity. She became deeply involved in public service, focusing on humanitarian work and political advocacy. Balancing motherhood and public life came naturally to her because she approached both with the same grace that had once captured audiences worldwide. Charles Black's influence on her life was profound. He was the calm to her energy, the quiet strength that kept her grounded through every challenge. Their marriage lasted around 55 years, a rare feat in any world, let alone one that had once revolved around Hollywood. For Shirley Temple, love was no longer about appearances or headlines. It was finally about building a home where laughter was real and where children could grow up without the spotlight that had consumed her youth. Still, even with the peace she found in her later years, some parts of her past never truly disappeared. Hollywood's shadow has a way of stretching far and wide, and whispers about her early life, her lost childhood, and the secrets that followed her continued to surface long after she left the screen. And years later, those whispers would turn into something far more haunting. Rumors her own children would one day have to confront. The controversial rumors. When someone becomes as famous as Shirley Temple, reality starts to blur with rumors. One of the earliest and most bizarre theories was that Shirley Temple wasn't a child at all. In the 1930s, stories began circulating that she was actually a 30-year-old dwarf pretending to be a little girl. It sounds absurd now, but back then, the idea spread fast, whispered in fan circles and even discussed in print. People couldn't believe a child could memorize lines, perform complicated dances, and carry entire films with such confidence. Her professionalism was seen as suspicious, as if there had to be something unnatural behind it. Shirley later laughed about it, but at the time it was unsettling to think that so many genuinely believed she wasn't a child. There were also disturbing rumors about her appearance. Some claimed her famous curls weren't real, that she wore a wig to maintain that perfect halo of hair in every film. Others took it further, suggesting she wore dentures because her teeth were too perfect and never seemed to fall out as she grew older. Every small detail about her appearance was picked apart by people who couldn't accept that she was simply a gifted child performer. Her image was so carefully managed that it almost worked against her. The more polished she appeared, the more people doubted she was real. Things reached a peak when one of the most astonishing stories made its way to the Vatican. According to accounts from the time, officials there received so many letters questioning whether Shirley Temple was actually a child that they decided to look into it. A priest was reportedly sent to investigate, tasked with confirming whether Hollywood's biggest star was, in fact, a little girl or some kind of elaborate trick. It sounds like a fable, but it really happened. And then there were the truly disturbing rumors. One woman wrote to Shirley's studio claiming the child star had stolen her daughter's soul. She insisted that her little girl's spirit had somehow been transferred into Shirley, explaining the young actress's unnatural talent. Studio staff dismissed it as the rambling of a disturbed fan, but it was far from an isolated incident. Others believed Shirley was a puppet controlled by hidden handlers, a clone created for propaganda, or even part of a secret government experiment to lift the nation's morale during the Great Depression. The theories were wild, and yet people continued to share them. Part of what fueled all this was her sudden disappearance from film at such a young age. One moment, she was the biggest star in the world. The next, she was gone. There were no scandalous headlines or tragic downfall. She simply stopped appearing on screen. To fans who had watched her grow up in theaters, it felt unnatural. People didn't see the quiet teenager trying to live a normal life. They saw a mystery. And where there's mystery, imagination takes over. Shirley Temple understood that fascination better than anyone. In her memoir, Child Star, she addressed many of these stories directly, calling them absurd but persistent. She knew that part of what made her so beloved was the same thing that made her seem unreal, and that she had been turned into an idea rather than a person. That kind of image is hard to shake even decades later. The strange thing about fame is that it can follow you long after you've stopped seeking it. Even when Shirley became a mother, a diplomat, and an accomplished woman in her own right, the stories about her past never fully went away. They resurfaced from time to time, sometimes playfully, sometimes cruelly, as if people couldn't separate the myth from the person. And as she grew older, her story took on a more somber tone. The same strength that had carried her through fame and rumors was tested in far more personal ways, through the health battles that revealed both her resilience and her humanity. Health battles and tragic passing. Shirley Temple's greatest test in life came in 1972 when she received news that would change everything. At 44, Shirley was diagnosed with breast cancer, a disease that, at the time, was rarely discussed openly. Most women suffered in silence, and the topic was considered almost taboo in public conversation. But Shirley Temple was never one to hide from a challenge. After undergoing a mastectomy, she made a decision that shocked the world. She spoke about it publicly. From her hospital bed, she gave a statement to the press, explaining her diagnosis, her surgery, and her hope for recovery. It was a bold move that broke barriers. In doing so, she became one of the first major public figures to talk openly about breast cancer, encouraging women everywhere to seek early detection and not be ashamed of their struggles. Her openness was revolutionary. She transformed her private pain into a public act of courage, using her voice to save lives. In typical Shirley fashion, she did it without drama or self-pity, just quiet strength. This decision helped destigmatize the disease and changed how women approach their own health. The years that followed were filled with grace and purpose. She devoted her time to her family and continued her work in diplomacy and humanitarian causes, representing the United States in Ghana and Czechoslovakia, and later serving as chief of protocol in Washington, D.C. She moved through life with a sense of wisdom, a woman who had seen the extremes of fame and still managed to hold on to her kindness. On February 10, 2014, Shirley Temple passed away at the age of 85. News of her death spread across the world within hours, and tributes poured in from every corner, from Hollywood stars who had grown up idolizing her, to diplomats who had worked alongside her, to fans who still remembered the joy she brought into their lives. Her death marked the end of an era, but the tragic cause of her death also reignited interest in her life and inevitably in the rumors that had followed her since childhood. This time, however, her children decided to speak up, setting the record straight about what was true, what wasn't, and what their mother had really carried with her all those years. The shocking revelation. In the years following Shirley Temple's passing, her children, particularly her daughter Lori Black, have spoken more openly about the woman behind the legend. For so long, the world saw Shirley as a fixed image, the dimpled child with perfect curls and a sunshine smile. But to her family, she was so much more than that. One of the first confirmations came about Shirley's health. For years, the public was told she had passed from natural causes, but her death certificate later confirmed she died of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a condition most commonly linked to long-term smoking. Her children admitted that their mother had indeed been a smoker for much of her life, something she had carefully hidden to protect her wholesome image. They explained that she never wanted young fans or admirers to associate her name with a harmful habit. In private, she had tried to quit many times but struggled like so many others of her generation. It was one of the few contradictions between Shirley's public and private worlds, an effort to shield her image from anything that might dim the innocence she once represented. Her children also opened up about how deeply she had been affected by the darker side of Hollywood. Shirley herself had written about it in her 1988 memoir, Child Star. But hearing her children revisit those memories gave them new emotional weight. Lori described how her mother, even as a child, had to develop instincts to protect herself. She recalled Shirley speaking about grown men who tried to take advantage of her fame and studio executives who saw her as property rather than a person. Yet Shirley managed to navigate that world with remarkable composure. They also confirmed that this same strength carried over into her later years in politics and diplomacy, where she faced discrimination of a different kind. As a former child actress entering the male-dominated world of international affairs, Shirley was often underestimated. In fact, she would quietly let others dismiss her, only to win them over through her intelligence and charm. She never raised her voice, but she never let anyone silence her either. The family also spoke about how she coped with the endless rumors that followed her throughout life, from absurd claims about being a 30-year-old woman in disguise to strange myths about cloning and government experiments. Rather than grow bitter, Shirley met them all with humor. In her memoir, Child Star, Shirley had already hinted at the layers behind her life, the loneliness of being pushed into adulthood too soon, the trauma of exploitation on set, and the complicated pride she felt toward a career that both made and scarred her. but she also wrote with deep love about her years as a diplomat and mother, describing those as her real life. She found her greatest sense of purpose not in fame, but in service and family. Her children have made it their mission to carry that truth forward. They've emphasized that their mother's legacy isn't just about being America's sweetheart or the girl who lifted spirits during the Great Depression, but about the woman who grew from that experience, who fought to redefine herself, and who lived with remarkable grace despite what fame had taken from her. They want the world to remember her not as a myth or symbol, but as a full human being who was strong, flawed, witty, and endlessly resilient. Do you think Shirley Temple was treated fairly by Hollywood? Drop your answers in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates.